Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. What are the scariest experiences from your travels? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Was traveling alone in Costa Rica. Decided to head to a nearby tourist beach town, but had to walk along a rural dirt road to get there. The road was super quiet, and about midday, a guy on a bicycle appeared out of nowhere behind me and about a football field's length ahead of me, halted to a stop, got off his bike, and looked back at me. I was in my early 20s and was a bit nervous for obvious reasons. I was fully prepared to be assaulted and cursed myself for being so confident in walking around a foreign country by myself with no immediate weapons. I stopped and pretended to be really interested in a rock, hoping the guy would move along, but he stood next to his bike. I had a gut feeling to just turn around, but I was at least 2 to 3 miles from the nearest crossroad, and even that was another 2 to 3 miles from the nearest town. Then, the beach town was another mile or two ahead of me. As I tied my shoe for the third time, the guy got on his bike, and I almost sighed a big breath of relief until he began pedaling toward me. I gulped because I was sure I was about to die. He pulled up next to me, and with the biggest smile on his face, he said, "Hola, hello." I nodded and said hi, and began walking. He walked his bike along beside me and told me his name. He asked me why I was walking down the road, because it was a service road used mainly by trucks, and I should be careful. But he would walk with me if I was heading to the beach, because his bike has a big reflector on the back. He was incredibly kind, and was fascinated by me being a foreigner in his home country, and explained that he spoke some English but it wasn't very good, and liked meeting tourists so he could practice. He was a local who grew up in a very tiny town in central Costa Rica and sold bread that his family made at home to the restaurants along the beach. He walked with me until we got to the next crossroad about a mile up the road. He has to turn off the road to get to his family's bakery, and he thanked me for taking the time to let him practice his English with me and said he hoped I was loving Costa Rica. It was a weird lesson for me that I've since taken on my travels. The world is full of a lot of bad people, but there's way more nice, well-meaning, good people out there who just want to learn about parts of the world outside of their own. I'm just fortunate and privileged enough that I can visit other parts of the world and don't have to wait for the world to come visit me. Rented a Vespa while in Italy, drove an hour out to Sorrento to Naples and then back again. Pulled off on an exit, and coming around a blind bend, there was an object on the road. Coming closer to it, realized it was a white animal, large, and just standing there. It lowered its head towards me, eyes glowing red. I scooted the Vespa backwards and turned the wrong way on the ramp to get back on the highway. The animal, bigger than a dog, smaller than a bear, was walking towards me. I went full throttle and fortunately didn't stall out the Vespa. I'm alive to tell the tale of my encounter with what I now know was a white wolf. I was traveling in Nicaragua several years ago when I got lost and ended up having to take a taxi at 9:30 p.m. back to my hostel. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, the taxi driver locked the taxi doors and told me that I had misunderstood the fare. He claimed I owed him $100, which was several times more than we had agreed upon. I tried to pry the doors open from the inside, but was completely trapped. Thankfully, he let me out of the taxi after taking all the money I had on me. The hostel workers told me I was incredibly lucky. A few days earlier, a taxi driver had kidnapped another young female, assaulted her, then dumped her barely conscious body in a field outside of town, thinking that she was dead. A few local school children found her on the way to school in the morning. Yes, fortunate indeed. I'm glad you made it out okay. This, have to be very mindful in certain foreign countries, if not almost all of them. Driving through absolute BFE Northern Ontario, 7 hours north of Toronto, in late fall 11 years ago. This was at about 2 a.m. I was driving with my friend in the passenger seat, but by this point, he had fallen asleep. The roads up there are mostly well maintained, but it is extremely dark, and there's nobody else out there on the roads at that time in those parts. In addition, there was about 20 kilometers of nothing in either direction before you would hit a town of maybe 200 people. So, I'm driving down this road, high beams on. The trees are mostly barren, but some leaves left, and off to the side of the road I see a dude with his hood up, walking along the shoulder of the road. His back was to me, but he had no flashlight or anything, and it is pitch black, and also freezing cold out there. I was driving about 80 kilometers per hour, 50 mph, so I only noticed him for a couple of seconds before passing by. He was on the other side of the road. There was no way in F I was going to back to check, but there's no reason anyone should have been walking there alone at night along an empty road surrounded by nothing but trees for tens of kilometers in any direction. Madrid, 10 a.m. Getting robbed by some junkies who claimed they had HIV and who were armed with syringes they claimed to have used were pretty scary. Some shithole Laos border town, early evening, being stalked by a pack of 20 or so feral dogs and leading them away from both my girlfriend and my little sister was up there. Dubrovnik, post the '06 Australia v Croatia World Cup game, jumping out a bar window and legging it while 5 or 6 enormous effing shaven gorilla Croatian supporters gave chase was pretty scary. I think one of the closest times I've ever come to dying was probably when I got E. coli poisoning in Costa Rica and ignored it for a few days. Then on the way back home, I got stuck in another airport for an extra day and a half due to a canceled flight, and after all the puking and other intestinal distress for about a full week and no eating, I stupidly told myself that if I just don't eat, then I'll stop puking and pooping. I was super weak, super dehydrated, and out of my mind by the time my wife picked me up at the airport. Driving a U-Haul from California to Nevada and finding out my best friend manipulated me and my family into thinking I was never coming back, and I hated them all, then handing me a knife on the side of the road, admitted he ruined my life, and giving me the option of killing him and leaving. It was a vain attempt at manipulating me further. Parts of me wish I did because the rest of the trip was pure hell. He didn't let us my phone to find the roads, insisted on only using a real map because it's what men do. We almost slipped on ice in the road and crashed, then ran out of gas and had to sleep in a truck stop to keep from freezing to death. He talked the entire night, saying insane, weird things and trying to indoctrinate me into his new religion. When we got to Reno, I told my friends there I never wanted to see him again. My friends helped me after that, and the other guy got arrested for trespassing. I was so glad to finally be free of him. Gosh, I definitely knew someone like this, and you're better off cutting ties, so good. Hope you're doing well. A few years ago, I loaded a bunch of camping gear onto my bicycle and spent the better part of the next 7 months riding 5,300 miles, 8,500 kilometers, around much of the US. I did the trip solo. One night, I was just wild camping in the woods somewhere, as I often did. On this particular night, I came down with food poisoning. Spent the whole night tossing and turning and leaning out of the door of the tent to vomit. First thing next morning, my bike got a flat tire, and then I rode for half a day through a cold rain while still very sick to get a motel for some proper rest. 10 out of 10. Would still recommend riding a bicycle across a continent. I got a good one, I guess. Okay, so I got picked to go to IA, individual augmentation. So basically I got picked to get deployed during my normal seashore rotation in the Navy. Well, tried to get out of it, namely because I didn't qualify at all and shouldn't have even been considered. I had 2 PRT fitness failures. I was in my orders window, less than 12 months on shore orders, and my youngest was special needs, who had neurosurgery at 9 months old. Somehow I fell through the cracks, but I couldn't fight it, so here I am at the airport for my 9th deployment saying goodbye to my family. So, get boarded and sit down chatting with my wife via text message while waiting. We pull away and taxi, and when we get to our takeoff runway, I just get this pit in my stomach. But I ignore it since I've done this 9 times before, but we start accelerating. I get airsick on takeoff and landing, vertigo, so I usually close my eyes, and I'm usually okay and even fall asleep sometimes. But this time I felt we were accelerating for a really long time, and our nose or wheel was off the ground for what seemed like forever. Just when I opened my eyes to see what's going on, the plane pitches forward and down immediately, and I literally face plant into the seat in front of me because it caught me off guard. I thought that this was it. My luck had run out, but we eventually stopped and taxied back to the gate, where the pilot called over the intercom and notified us that one of the main doors or hatches became depressurized and opened as we were taking off, so they had to abort the takeoff immediately. Got a 24-hour reprieve from deployment as they didn't have another international plane to put us on, but that shit definitely had some major pucker moments for sure. Last summer, me and some friends were doing a weekend trip in the mountains in North Georgia. We were staying at my dad's cabin near Blairsville and wanted to go to another town called Helen. Really cool town, by the way, for those who don't know. TLDR. Town turned itself into a Bavarian alpine village lookalike. Has lots of shops, restaurants, and day activities. Anyway, we wanted to make a day out of it, so we left for it really early in the morning, and it being the mountains, there was a lot of really dense fog. Now, the road between the two towns goes directly through the Chattahoochee National Forest, so there's basically about a 30-minute stretch where there's nothing all around you. It basically takes you up to the top of a stretch of mountain, you drive across their tops for a bit, then it takes you down into a valley where Helen is. So here we are, driving down the road at the top of the mountain, completely surrounded by miles of what is essentially as close to wilderness you're going to get on the east coast of the US, surrounded on all sides by fog so thick you can only see 10 to 15 feet in any direction at best. The entire time, we didn't see a single other car. It felt really eerie, like we were in the start of a Twilight Zone episode. I half expected the fog to clear and us to be in a different reality or something. But here's the kicker. When we left at the end of the day, we had to take a different route because that way had been closed because someone had an accident and nearly drove off a cliff because the fog made it impossible to see the road. As far as I know, no one died, and I never saw anything about it on the news. The only reason we knew was because we drove up to that road and a cop was there putting the road closed sign up, and we asked him. My husband and I got married in Vegas back in 2015. We were walking down a busy highway when a creepy taxi driver kept driving up to us, insisting we get in his car. He told us he had a balance from the previous customer that was still ticking. He offered to take us wherever we needed to go. He followed us for over an hour, U-turn after U-turn, driving on the shoulder, sidewalk. We ended up getting a little lost, putting us in the ghetto. The taxi driver even found us there. We were walking through dark alleys with guard dogs and everything. Side note, we were 21 to 22 years old. We wanted to quickly get married. He was joining the service and wanted me to come with him. His dad is from the West Coast and offered to pay for the trip. My husband's sister met us out there, and with her car, she promised to take us to the courthouse to file and sign the paperwork. The morning of, the day before the wedding, she bailed with her boyfriend and said they were too drunk at 10 a.m. and we had to find another ride. The first night we were in Vegas, we got scammed by the hotel, also known as Treasure Island. They told us it was only a $100 advance deposit for the entire stay. I verbally confirmed it with the receptionist as she checked us in. We went out of town after getting all our luggage in our room, spent a couple $100. I had a feeling I should check my account for some reason. I then noticed the hotel charged us $800 in advance, $100 per night, not $100 total like the receptionist said. On top of that, they charged us for all the resorts within the hotel, whether or not if we used them, which we didn't. The hotel pretty much took all of our spending money for taxis, food, etc. We didn't want to bother my husband's dad for a cab. We underestimated the walk to the courthouse. It was an 11-minute drive that turned into an hour walk to and an hour walk back. Traveling in Paris alone, on my way to the Louvre, saw a guy chatting to two women a little bit ahead. They seemingly dismissed him. He saw me, came over speaking French, told him I don't speak French. He switches to English, tells me he's actually from Albania, asks me if I know where so-and-so is. I tell him I don't. He then starts asking me fairly innocuous questions. How am I? How am I liking Paris, etc., all while I'm still walking to the Louvre. He then starts asking me where I'm heading, who I'm staying with, where I'm staying. I kept it vague. Tell him I have some friends back at the hotel, meeting for dinner later, etc. When we get to the front of the Louvre, he tells me he can't afford to go in, and I should walk with him through Paris instead. I politely decline. He then tells me he'll wait out the front of the main entrance and then we can walk afterwards, and he'll show me the sights. I told him that sounds good. Went in, did my thing, exited via the other entrance or exit. It could have been an entirely innocent encounter, but something seemed off about him. Sure, it could have been completely innocent, but if you went through the Louvre even quickly, let's say 2 to 4 hours, and that person was still waiting, you probably don't want to walk alone with them. I don't know, that just made the cynic. I was in Idak, Himalaya, when a series of flash flooding happened. We had to run in the middle of the night to a shelter in knee-deep high water. The night was awful, and eventually they started to bring dead bodies in the shelter. A water bomb had flattened several houses on a nearby hill. For 2 days, we slept very little in the shelter and spent the days trying to phone home and queuing for food. On the third day, it was a beautiful sunny day, and we decided to go on a hike with a couple of local guys, also tourists. We hiked in a beautiful valley, an amazing place filled with orchids, traditional houses, etc. It was an amazing hike after 3 very stressful and scary days. At one point, a guy rushing on a motorbike stopped and asked what we were doing there. Apparently, a water reserve had broken up in the mountains. A wall of water was coming toward us. We looked around and we could literally see far away the shapes of all the people on the hill crest around us. I remember that I didn't even freak out. I just sank my shoulders and thought that was it. Luckily, it was a false alarm. Driving from Punta Cana to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic when my tire blew out. I was in the middle of nowhere. No lights, just open fields on both sides and nothing but blackness of night. A white van pulled up immediately as I was trying to call the rental car company about options. 5 men came out of the van, and I'm a small woman, barely 5'4" and about 100 pounds, so it was scary to say the least. No one could hear me scream. They changed the tire, were happy for the $20 I gave them, only cash I had. Then they offered me cocaine, marijuana, ecstasy. No, I'm just an alcoholic. Vino, vodka. I finally made it to the hotel, where I ordered dinner and a shot, and a large glass of wine. My friends were pissed I didn't bring them DR cocaine. Kidding me.